Hello, welcome to Citizens for Global Solutions in Minnesota. Today is September 16, 2021. I'm Katia. Citizens for Global Solutions in Minnesota is a nonprofit organization based in the state of Minnesota in the United States. Every third Thursday of every month, we host a global movies discussion about a movie based in true events or a documentary chosen to expand our horizons and educate us about important topics. The event is free and open to anyone. If you want to learn more about CGS Minnesota work, please visit our website, globalsolutionsmn.org. and follow us on Twitter and Facebook pages. Today, we will be talking about Julian Assange, journalist and founder of the WikiLeaks. We suggested documentaries of the prosecution of Assange, the United States versus Assange from ABC Australia, and Public Enemy from Deutsche Welle. In brief, in 2010, Chelsea Manning, a US soldier and intelligence analyst, shared thousands of files with WikiLeaks. Among those files, there was a video showing 2 US Apache helicopters shooting at a group of 10 civilian men in a street of Iraq. When a van driver stopped to help the wounded man, the pilots opened fire again while they can be heard laughing. 12 people were killed, including 2 Reuters reporters and 2 children of the van driver. That video caused shock worldwide, and in 2012, Assange sought political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he stayed for 7 years. Since 2019, he remains detained in the maximum security prison in Belmarsh, UK. To speak with us, I present you Stella Moris, lawyer, member of Assange's legal team, and the mother of his 2 younger children. Hello, Stella. Welcome. The floor is yours. And I would like to start by asking you to tell us, how is Assange? How is his health? And if you could describe the conditions, his conditions in prison, and how often he's allowed to receive visitors. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Katia, and thank you for inviting me to talk about Julian's situation. I always get this question, how is he doing? And the truth is that it's very difficult for him because he's been in Belmarsh prison now for almost 2.5 years. He's not serving a sentence. And in the UK, the remand prisoners, pre-trial remand prisoners are kept in regular prisons. It's not a jail. So he's there alongside, very serious convicted criminals. In Belmarsh, which is one of the UK's, probably the UK's harshest prison. It was built in the early 90s for IRA prisoners, and it's a very tough environment, especially under COVID. It's been very difficult. Between March 2020 and I think June 2021, I was able to visit him on very few occasions, and with social distancing rules, face coverings, and we could hardly hear each other in a very large hall with other prisoners receiving visits. It's not just the physical environment; it's the uncertainty and the prolonged nature of his detention. Even this started actually on the 7th of December 2010 when he was first arrested. He went to Wandsworth Prison, which is where Oscar Wilde was imprisoned, and then was granted bail after 10 days, spent a year and a half under very restrictive conditions of house arrest before he even went into the embassy, and obtained political asylum precisely in relation to this case, in relation to the Chelsea Manning publications. Ecuador, for 2 months, considered his refugee application, and for that investigated the public attacks on cable channels and by lawmakers and just this very public attacks by politically influential and positioned people on Julian, including calls for his extrajudicial assassination, kidnapping, designation as an enemy combatant, and so on. And at that stage, the UN had already declared that Chelsea Manning had been tortured in Quantico Bay. There was a wealth of evidence to sustain the application, and so that political asylum was granted. Then in 2019, it was summarily removed after sustained pressure by the United States, and also political change in Ecuador of entering into a close alliance at a political and military security level with the United States. And so Julian was refooled into the hands of British police inside the embassy. Extraordinary. He was arrested inside the embassy, even though Ecuador later claimed that he had not been arrested inside the embassy. Even British authorities contradicted that, and we all know that he was arrested inside the embassy by British police and forced out. He was given no time to take his belongings. His legal papers were all seized. His belongings were all seized by Ecuador and shipped to the US. And the moment Julian was arrested, within minutes, it became clear that he was also being arrested under a US warrant. And so everything that he had been saying for many years that had, that had informed his decision to seek political asylum in the first place, his fears that the United States would seek to prosecute him over these publications, turned out to all be correct. And so the initial indictment was then superseded within about a month, and 17 additional charges were brought under the U.S. Espionage Act. So he faces 175 years in US prison. And a further indictment was brought 1 year later when we were halfway into the extradition proceedings. Again, an extraordinary move by the US, which seems prepared to just twist the rules because it can. So I think it's really important to keep on revisiting not just how we got here, but also what's at stake. Because like any case that is defining of our times, it is not properly understood while it is developing. And if you look at the Dreyfus affair, it took, I don't know, at least a decade to unravel for people to really understand what was going on. And I think it's very similar here because, well, because he, you know, because it's been now almost 11 years of his deprivation of liberty, the precise form of those of, you know, initially in prison under house arrest, in the embassy under siege, and then finally arrested for the initial 9 years. He wasn't even charged anywhere. Well, there was a secret indictment in December 2017, but before that, there was no charge at all. Not in Sweden, not anywhere. And so, you know, it's quite a burden on the public to understand every little detail. So I think it's important to understand the big picture and what's really at stake. And what's really at stake is fundamentally whether the United States is a dictatorship or whether it is a democracy, whether there is the freedom to discuss, publish proof of what the government is doing, including committing crimes, and whether you can do so freely or whether it is a country that does not allow free speech. And this is a fundamental departure from what has been before, because the US has an extraordinary, you know, extraordinarily bloated security state within it, which has only been balanced to a degree by public accountability or the prospect of public accountability because of the strength, the gold standard of the First Amendment, which is unmatched anywhere else in the world, where it was never a question whether journalists are allowed to publish true information. And so that's where we stand now, that you know, under the Obama administration, the publications from the Manning leaks, there was the administration declined to prosecute Julian and commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. And that was a maintenance of the status quo. But then under the Trump administration, the Trump administration went one step further and decided to go after the publisher. The Obama administration had started preparing the ground for this scenario. However, because the Obama administration had tripled the prosecutions against journalistic sources under the Espionage Act, and so there was a crack in the door that Trump was able to push through, and the prosecution against Julian came in the context of the Trump administration being at war with the press, being at war with whistleblowers, and wanting to put a head on a pike. And that head on a pike was Julian, because Julian's case is precedent setting in the United States. But the proposition of, you know, the thesis that is being advanced is so outlandish that it has global implications. Why? Because Julian is not a US citizen. He was not in the United States. He was publishing from Europe in cooperation with other publications who are publishing the same material. If you look at the Guantanamo files, I think it's a Telegraph published exactly the same material in full. And so the departure isn't just applying the Espionage Act to a publisher, but applying it to a foreign publisher. And so the US government is advancing that its Espionage Act cannot only be repurposed to journalists, but to journalists abroad. And this is a mad proposition. It suggests that there is no press freedom anywhere, because the US can issue an extradition request for anyone, and then you have to deal with the extradition request and the you know, the presumption when there's an extradition for a serious crime is to imprison you, and in Julian's case, he faces 175 years for his work. So the chilling effect is enormous, and it also sets a standard that other countries will emulate. If the US can apply its censorship laws abroad to foreign journalists who are publishing about things that it doesn't like, then so can Turkey and Saudi Arabia and whoever. And that also means that, you know, no one is safe. Imagine you're traveling on holiday in any third country. You can be seized and subject to extradition to some random country that has decided to use the same reasoning and apply its laws extraterritorially in the same way. And it's very attractive, I would imagine, for authoritarian states to seek to censor and imprison dissidents abroad in this manner. And so, you know, so this is really an attack on global press freedom. And that's why I say that because the US has decided to use its Espionage Act to attack the foreign press in this way, then there has to be a global international response, because it's an attack on other countries' sovereignty. But freedom of the press, freedom of expression is such a fundamental part of a political culture that it's really an attack on countries' ability to determine their own political freedoms, their own, you know, what the limits are of their political debate. And it's just such an attack on on civil liberties and press freedoms abroad in Europe, in the UK, and so on. So I think there is a creeping realization of the enormous implications that this case is having and will have should this continue, and all the major free speech and civil liberties organizations are demanding that the case be dropped. And the New York Times and the Washington Post, at an editorial level, they see the severe danger to them, to their ability to publish freely, because it is, it's not just about Julian. It's about setting new standards, establishing a global race to the bottom on free speech, free press, endangering journalists everywhere, making political, the imprisonment of dissidents more acceptable, and basically reducing our democratic safeguards everywhere. And so this global recognition, I would say, is growing, but Julian's case needs to be properly examined and re-examined and understood, because Katya was asking me about good documentaries about Julian's case, and there is no definitive documentary because this isn't properly understood. There's a lot of there have been a lot of attacks over the years, and that have distracted from what this is really about, which is the fact that WikiLeaks published concrete evidence of criminality, corruption, of complicity, US complicity in torture, but not just, and US crimes by the US military, but not just the US military, the Iraqi police authorities torturing people, just this vast scale of information has exposed countless illegal acts and corruption, and so on. And when WikiLeaks published this, there was an impasse. There was an expectation that there would be investigations, that people would be brought to account, that the war criminals would be, who are completely identifiable, would be put on trial and so on. None of that happened. Instead, what happened was a deflection, an attack on, Julian's imprisonment is just one aspect of the many, many attacks there have been on not just his character, but on WikiLeaks' ability to receive donations, on, many, many levels over the past decade. But now, the political persecution is naked. It couldn't be any clearer. And so that's where we're at. And I think, whereas a few years ago, we were arguing that there, against a kind of an invisible enemy, there were, there were articles saying that Julian was paranoid, that the US would never do this, and so on. The true state of affairs is clear for everyone to see, and now's the time for everyone to, defend the most fundamental aspects of what makes up a democracy, and all the support that has come about from these institutions, from Amnesty, from Human Rights Watch, the UN, but also the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and others, has come about because of regular citizens and members of these unions and associations or organizations actually mobilizing internally to save Julian's life, essentially. And this needs to continue and escalate because it's already been 2.5 years of Julian being in Belmarsh prison, and he really needs his freedom very soon.
Thank you so very much, Stella. It's wonderful to hear from you. I also would like to invite Gabriel Shipton. He's Assange's brother, and he's here with us tonight. And I would like to hear from you. And I would like to read to you something that your brother wrote. He said, "If wars can be started by lies, they can be stopped by the truth." I would like you to talk about what is happening right now with you and your family, and how do you see this fight against the extradition? And thank you for coming, Gabriel.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I just want to, my father and I, Julian's dad and I were in Minnesota in June. We did a rally with Women Against Military Madness, WAM, and the Veterans for Peace, and Colleen Rowley. That was, I think that was in St. Paul. We had got a really good crowd. It's great to see all the people come out to hear us speak then. We're all working all around the world. I'm in Australia at the moment. We've been over in the US. Stella's in the UK. We're all sort of advocating on Julian's behalf. Just trying to raise awareness about the case. Get proper information to people. So really, I guess it's sort of a how has it affected the family? It's sort of a full-time job for us now to get Julian out of prison. So yeah, that's how it's sort of affected the family. Obviously we're torn apart as a family. Like Julian's over in the UK. I'm here in Australia. It's quite hard to travel to the UK at the moment with all the restrictions and things like that. So we're sort of torn apart in that way. What's interesting, just what Stella was saying is Julian was sort of trapped in the UK. So if you're what she was talking about, journalists traveling to other countries and things like that, and the extraterritoriality of how the Espionage Act is applied. You can see that in Julian's case perfectly. He was traveling in the UK. When this an arrest warrant was issued for him, and he was essentially trapped there. So that can happen to say if is traveling to an ally of China, perhaps, then there's some espionage act that could Chinese espionage act that could be used to trap that journalist in that third country. So I think that's a sort of very, very good point that Stella has made there. The thing with this case is that it's always brought back onto Julian. And one thing that Julian said, a quote of Julian's that always rings true to me is, he said, where they couldn't pick holes in our arguments, they would drive horses and carriages through my character. And we've seen that for the last 10 years. There's not WikiLeaks' work. There is not one piece of their work that has been, even accused of being false. It's all been in the public interest. It's all been, 100% correct. So over the years, the people who are against, the people who have been exposed in all these documents, can't make arguments against them. So they always go after Julian. They go to his character. They malign him. They take away his liberty. They take him away from his family. They put him in prison. They smear in the media. So it's just, it just goes on and on and on. And I think that's a really good quote of Julian's that still rings true 10 years later.
Yes, thank you, Gabriel. So I think we could open for questions. And the first question that we have from the audience is from Vinny. He asks, Stella, why do you believe that Biden administration is pursuing this extradition after Obama administration chose to not, for what they correctly referred to as the New York Times problem?
That's a very good question. It doesn't really make sense. Why is Biden choosing to walk in Trump's footsteps in relation to this? What is referred to as the New York Times problem is essentially a fundamental constitutional problem, because they just couldn't find a way to prosecute Julian without setting a precedent for the rest of the press. And so under the Trump administration, they just went ahead and did that, precisely because it would set a precedent for the rest of the press. So that's where things are at. There are various aspects to this. There are, people within the DOJ, within the Biden administration, who disagree with this prosecution, and that's important to keep in mind, that the administration is not a singular monolithic entity. There are different factions, there are different interests, there are career prosecutors that want to advance their careers. Once you set into motion a prosecution, then it takes, it would take Garland and a few people under Garland to actually have take a serious look at this case and understand that there is no legal case. I mean, what came out during the extradition hearings was just hugely embarrassing to the U.S. The second superseding indictment is essentially based on the testimony of an Icelandic individual by the name of Thordarson. And just over the summer, an Icelandic investigative publication conducted an in-depth interview with him, and he said that the allegations in the indictment that concern him as the witness contradict his testimony to the FBI, contradict what he told the FBI. So the question is, what is that doing in the indictment? And not just in the indictment. The DOJ deliberately mislead the UK courts. The judge cited the allegations connected to Thordarson repeatedly in the judgment, in the extradition judgment in January. The indictment, as it refers to WikiLeaks publication, allegedly, reckless publication of names, was countered by witnesses who were working with WikiLeaks at the time, from Der Spiegel, from other publications, who testified that Julian and WikiLeaks conducted a thorough review and made every effort to protect identities. And so all these claims that have been allowed to sit there for 10 years were systematically destroyed during these extradition proceedings. The problem, of course, is that this is not a trial. And the UK courts have the excuse to say, well, this is for the US to hear, and we're not going to look at the merits of this. The presumption is that we're going to believe the US prosecutors. And it's also a political game, right? The UK and the US have a very close relationship. And in extradition proceedings, it's always an uphill battle because UK courts are reluctant to accept arguments that the DOJ might be misleading the courts, that they're, we couldn't even cross-examine the US prosecutors. Kronberg, who's quite notorious, wrote the majority of the affidavits, and even though we had experts to counter those claims, we couldn't directly cross-examine him. Just had the submissions in paper that our witnesses had to be cross-examined on. The disparity is incredible, but still, I think during these proceedings, a lot of the misconceptions of what the case is about and the grounds for bringing this prosecution were dispelled and shown to be completely baseless, and the political nature of this prosecution really became clear.
So Dick has another question. What motivated Julian to begin WikiLeaks in the first place? Most of us have only the most sketchy information about the specifics. In your view, would you like to take that one?
Well, different aspects. Julian is he's a problem solver, and he approached what he saw as an emerging problem as the world was coming into the internet. This is like, so we're looking at the WikiLeaks was founded in 2006, actually started publications in 2007. And Julian understood the architecture of the internet. He was a cryptographer, privacy specialist, and came up with this solution to protecting the identity of sources, mainly because because there was no privacy on the internet. The privacy tools that existed were, the remit of the very few who cryptographers essentially, and so he came up with this anonymous Dropbox, and received leaks from all over the world. And for the first few years, WikiLeaks was small, but was receiving amazing leaks from all over the world, and also from the US increasingly over time. But I think to understand WikiLeaks, I think you need to think back to the 2000s, where government accountability, government transparency, these concepts, these terms were in vogue. Nowadays, they've almost become subversive, transparency. And at the same time as the post 9/11 world became increasingly undermining of the existing norms, these state of exception, not just by the US, it brought in all its allies into these new practices. New concepts were developed, and enemy combatants, Guantanamo Bay, black sites, enhanced interrogation techniques, aka torture. This was all happening just as, and the counter current was calls for transparency, and at the same time, the world was coming into the internet, and so all these things converged. And Julian saw WikiLeaks as a means towards this increased transparency movement. And there were other initiatives along the same lines of government transparency and lists for leaks. The Freedom of Information Act, became more common, and so it's part of that movement. But WikiLeaks just solved the whistleblower problem because of Julian's skills as a cryptographer, and also his vision about how this problem could be solved on a global scale.
Thank you, Stella. And actually, in the same note, Der Spiegel, The Guardian, New York Times, they published the files, and they were not prosecuted. And Daniel Ellsberg, who is a fervent defender of Assange, who was responsible for the Pentagon Papers, he was facing 115 years of prosecution, and eventually he won the case. And the case was dropped. Most recently, we have Glenn Greenwald, who currently lives in Brazil. He published and for which he received the Pulitzer Award. And actually, after his Pulitzer, he moved to Brazil, and he is still publishing leaks, and they are making a difference, and they are always against some branch of the government that is doing something wrong. And I'm sure you all read about, and he is not persecuted. And let's face the truth, we are not talking about a country that's known most recently for being very kind to the press. So there is an impression that he, Assange, wants to be made as an example. And I wanted to ask both of you, if you will, what is this example that if you were not established news media, if you were not big, you should not publish certain matters, or what? What is example exactly? Or do you agree with that?
Well, there was an attempt to prosecute Greenwald in Brazil on the basis of, I think the allegation was that he had conspired with the source, who was a hacker, but that the charges were dropped. So, and that was just after, you know, the indictment against Julian, and the world is looking at what's happening to Julian, and it's not only setting a new standard in the United States, but elsewhere as well. It's kind of like a license to go after the press for other authoritarian regimes. I think, you know, this issue about whether Julian is an established news media, it's just it's a false discussion, really. First of all, it is not the role of government to determine who is a journalist and who is not a journalist. The First Amendment doesn't distinguish journalists as some privileged group. It applies to everyone. And furthermore, Julian is a recognized journalist, a member of his union in Australia since 2007, a card-holding member of the International Federation of Journalists. As far as the professional journalism associations, Julian is a journalist, and also as far as the, you know, the award-granting bodies, like the Walkley Foundation in Australia, which is the Australian equivalent to the Pulitzer Prize. While Julian has won that, he's won the Amnesty Award for New Media. He's won the Martha Gellhorn Prize for Journalist of the Year, and so on and so on. It would probably be hard to find another journalist who has won as many journalistic prizes. So this is just a false narrative advanced by the by the U.S. administration, suggesting that they can determine who is and who isn't a journalist, including foreign journalists. And of course, there have been some people within the journalistic profession who have also repeated claim that Julian's not a journalist, and I think that comes out of fear. I think they think they don't want the precedent to be set for them, and therefore they think that, well, if we can distinguish Julian from what we're doing, then we should be fine. But of course, Julian is not being prosecuted as a whistleblower. Julian is being prosecuted as a journalist for journalistic activities, for receiving information from a journalistic source, Chelsea Manning, for possessing that information, and for communicating that information, i.e. publishing it. So there's just if that is the goal that was attempted by these, other journalists by trying to distinguish themselves from Julian, then it failed because the U.S. Government went after journalism in the indictment. Yeah.
I think also important that the larger publication recognize press freedoms that this prosecution of Julian, has. The executive editor of the Washington Post, executive editor of the New York Times, editorial in the Guardian, have all expressed their concern. Have all expressed that this is a threat to their journalism. So he does. It is a threat to their journalism, and that's why he is being prosecuted. It's not just Julian; it's all of the press that is being that has been prosecuted or gone after here.
The way that the New York Times editorial board put it is that this case is a dagger aimed at the heart of the First Amendment, and that they understand it because they have their in-house lawyers that have actually looked into the case and properly understood the implications. Does the general public really understand that? I don't think so. I think it really needs to be spelled out and explained and re-explained, and because there's too much of a concept over the years that Julian is somehow sui generis, and that WikiLeaks is somehow different, or and so that infects the lack of understanding of what the implications are for this case.
It's sort of, it's manufactured consent basically to push the prosecution forward. So they're trying to establish that WikiLeaks isn't a journalistic organization, so that they can contract the First Amendment, all the First Amendment rights. That's how they're pushing the prosecution, how the DOJ is pushing the prosecution forward.
Sorry. Christy has a question. Christy, unmute yourself, please. You are muted.
Press your space
I
bar.
was just thinking about the advocacy team. I guess that whether or not there are then the independent individual journalists here in the US, and how, who's coordinating kind of the advocacy leaders, such as, you mentioned, Gabriel, that you had met with Wham and Colleen Rowley in terms of the whistleblowers, although that might not be that isn't the charges, but there's still an advocacy group that probably could be supportive. And then, the individual journalists who have broken stories. Obviously, Woodward was with Washington Post, but are there, I guess, any kind of concerted, organized efforts in the United States around to support, I guess, your efforts?
Yes, there certainly is. There's the Courage Foundation, who are sort of coordinating in the USA. There's also AssangeDefense.org, and you can go on there. They have an event calendar that has different events that are going to be happening, over the next month in the lead up to the appeal hearing on the 27th. So yeah, there are organisations and groups all throughout the US with my father, Julian's dad, my father and I, we traveled, I think it was to 15 cities in June, doing events, actions, from protests on the street to, larger, I think St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Paul was one of the largest sort of speaking events that we did. So yeah, there are groups all over the country who are, sort of grassroots activist groups, as well as these sort of organizations like Courage Foundation and Assange Defense, who you can go and see, where these things are taking place.
And can I just follow that up? I mean, do you have actually some of these individual players? Because as you've mentioned, it is such a political charge link as well, and whether or not, there's anyone who has the ear of administration and the strategists, I guess, on what's happening.
We are working with some organizations in Washington, certainly, who are sort of lobbying on our behalf. So yes, there is some efforts to make that happen, but there needs to be more and more, to really make a difference.
Thank you,
I mean,
Chris. Go ahead.
The difficulty is that we're not in the United States, that we're fighting, here in the UK, and we've made, huge, I think, progress in terms of the public understanding about the case, sympathy towards Julian, kind of a sense that this is fundamentally unjust and wrong. And that combines with, other factors. There's irritation over the CIA agent who ran over a teenager here, and who the US doesn't want to extradite, and killed him. And so, we're not in the United States. Gabriel and Julian's father, John, were in the United States for about a month over the summer. And it would be easier if we were there. I am concerned that the urgency with this case kind of, what should happen, what needs to happen is the Biden administration needs to just drop this case and realize that it's harmful to the administration, to its interests, to the Constitution, to the press, to its ability to further its foreign policy interests abroad, to conduct this case. And we do need, a greater understanding for that to happen. I think on an individual level, there are lots of, supportive journalists, but there should be more information out there. It should be, the case is so incredible. I mean, just take any aspect of it. For example, Sheldon Adelson, who was Trump's biggest financial backer, and probably the billionaire with the greatest influence on Donald Trump. At his inauguration, you had Donald Trump and his immediate family and Sheldon Adelson next to him. That person was he's a casino magnate, and he had contracted the security company in the embassy that was working inside the embassy and and that security company that was working for Adelson was spying on Julian's lawyers, violating his legally privileged meetings with his lawyers. The whistleblowers from that company talk about plots to poison Julian, to kidnap Julian from the embassy. It's just extraordinary. Every aspect of this case deserves a lot more attention and understanding. Now, maybe some newspapers were afraid of being sued by Adelson, but Adelson passed away a few months ago. So, it's just, I think the case is not properly understood, that what's at stake is not properly understood. And there needs to be a lot of groundwork done there to really get people to understand that this is their liberties that are at stake, and that if this is allowed to, if this isn't reversed, then the United States is fundamentally changed. It's a radical departure, and it's no longer, it's like I've said it before, like the superpower with a free press is fundamentally completely different from one that does not have a free press. It changes everything. And the US has had an extraordinarily resilient protection over 200 years or whatever it is, but that's being undone right now, and it's just the ignorance about that fact that stands between that being where the US is going, or it being reversed.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bharat sends a question. Does WikiLeaks have sources from China, Russia, and other authoritarian regions that can inform the world at large of their deeds and misdeeds? I have an answer for that, but they don't want my answer, so I'm gonna let you guys take that one.
Yeah, if you go to wikileaks.org and go to, well, you can do a word search, or also /wiki and search by hashtags. Then you can see the various publications there have been about China and Russia and so on. In fact, WikiLeaks has been banned. Actually, I haven't checked recently, to be honest, but was banned in China, on the Chinese internet, I think from about 2000, almost from the beginning, because of the Chinese publications. And there's a very interesting interview with Julian from January 2010, so before Collateral Murder, on the BBC. I think it's on YouTube. It's called The Culture Show. And Julian says, the future of journalism is either journalism will follow the US model, the First Amendment, the freedom to publish, or it will follow the Chinese model of censorship. And the risk is that the world will go to the Chinese model, and 10 years on, seems like it's the latter, through the censorship on social media platforms, the prosecution of Julian, and just generally a weakening of the free press and free speech. So it's very yeah, it's interesting to watch that.
Well, let's talk a little about UK's position. We have talked about US request for extradition. So can you explain what's the legal reason, if any, for the UK to keep Assange in prison while the extradition is decided? Why it looks, not only to me, but in many interviews and newspapers and media, that UK's position is very subservient. So I know that you have heard that a few times because I saw you in some interviews, hearing from your interviewers.
Well, the refusal of bail comes out of the US opposing bail. So it's just, the judge has so far found in favor of the US, and the reason given is that Julian sought and obtained asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, which is his fundamental right, and was granted it on reasoned grounds. However, that is the formal pretext to keep Julian incarcerated. Now, the European Court of Human Rights tends to consider the 2-year mark significant in terms of the disproportionality of holding a person on remand. And so there's a hope that the UK will run out of excuses. Now, Julian's been, the 2 years on remand will be on the 22nd of September. And the appeal hearing is on the 27th and 28th of October. It's very unlikely that the courts would grant bail before that. And it's tricky because the sorry, what was the question again?
Well, I wanted to understand.
Oh, the UK courts.
Because the UK seems to be subservient position for the US. So I don't see that only the US is, not that I'm not diminishing what US is doing, but I'm concerned about, the independence of countries. And I don't see that happening. I feel that subservient position. So I wanted to hear from you. What do you?
Yeah, I mean,
I know you live there, so.
Part of it is the US-UK extradition treaty, which was negotiated, in the aftermath of 9/11, is lopsided, and the US doesn't have to provide any prima facie evidence. And there's been a long-standing frustration in the UK that there is this imbalanced treaty with the US. But the courts have always been, very accommodating with the United States. And However, the UK courts are, they are capable of reaching an independent conclusion. And, that's what we have to hope for and work towards. I don't think there's the possibilities are nil of actually winning this, because I think because there is a sense here that this is a political case, that this is an abuse of the extradition arrangements, that this is wrong, and an understanding that Julian's life is at stake. But it's a difficult circumstance to fight this case, obviously, because the US and the UK are very close. And the UK, has to be said, in the US, at least there's a healthy discussion about the powers and the excesses of the security agencies and so on. In the UK, there's kind of a fetish around the security state, around MI5 and MI6, and I think it comes from a very successful propaganda around James Bond that has kind of infected the culture. There is very little. It's not like the United States. So this is quite a frightening aspect of the United Kingdom, where the security agencies have a lot of power, and they're up to very similar things to what the US does, often in cooperation with the US, but nowhere near as much scrutiny. And Julian did upset that sector in the US and the UK.
Stella, Gail sent a question. How can Assange, be held for 11 years without charge? That's outrageous. What about the right to a speedy trial? So if you could actually, I really welcome those questions, because that's the moment that we realize that, we need to talk about this so people understand. So if you could break down the 7 years in the embassy and the 2 years in Belmarsh, if you will, please.
Yeah, so the initial, between 2010 and 2019, Julian was not charged. The initial, so he was initially arrested under a Swedish arrest warrant, and in Sweden, they can issue arrest warrants without charging a person, and the arrest warrant was for questioning. And the UK, subsequently, we found out through Freedom of Information Act disclosures that the UK authorities were telling Sweden not to question Julian on UK soil, which was highly unusual because this is routine, and there are, well-established cooperation agreements in Europe for people to be questioned abroad, even when they're charged. But behind the scenes, the UK authorities were telling Sweden to extradite Julian and not to question him and not to advance the investigation. And so that kept on. And Julian tried to compel Swedish authorities to question him, to advance the investigation, and they refused. Completely extraordinary. So this highly unusual, inexplicable behavior by the authorities started from 2010 and kept him in kind of a legal limbo, and allowed his reputation to be dragged through the mud, and a complete misrepresentation of what was actually going on, because it was kind of counterintuitive that the so-called suspect was trying to advance the investigation and be questioned and so on. Swedish authorities wanted to put him in pretrial detention, and Julian insisted that he was willing to cooperate and answer any questions, but wasn't willing to be extradited, especially because there was no charge, and be put in prison in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language. And also Sweden has a very bad record in relation both to rendition and extradition, US extradition. Has extradited every person that the US has requested since the year 2000. So he lost the extradition battle in the UK during the time, the year and a half between December 2010, when he was first arrested, and June 2012. He was initially in prison, then under house arrest, and the UK courts ordered his extradition, and that's when he sought asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy from the US extradition. And even when he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, both he independently and the Ecuadorian authorities extended an invitation to the Swedish authorities to come and question him and advance the investigation. They continued to refuse. In 2014, Julian made an application to the UN Working Group on arbitrary detention against both Sweden and the UK, and it took them, I think, over a year of investigating, and it's a adversarial process. So the UK and Sweden also submitted their defenses, and the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention determined that Julian was being arbitrarily detained inside the embassy, that there was an abusive process by the Swedish authorities by refusing to advance the investigation with no justification, and so Sweden and the UK lost that process. And it was after that the Swedish courts, because Julian continued to try to compel through Swedish courts the prosecutor to either drop the case or charge him, because the question was, Julian was kept in a situation where he didn't have the rights of the defendant. Once he was actually charged, if he had been charged, he would have discovery. And we knew that the Swedish prosecutors had a series of text messages between the two women, which the lawyers had seen, saying they didn't want to accuse Julian of anything, that it was the police that was trying to arrest him, that they were being railroaded, and so on. And so these text messages were never actually given to the defense, but the lawyers were able to read them, and so we were trying to advance, take Julian out of this legal limbo where he had no rights, and he was just unable to defend himself, unable to leave the embassy, and so on. And after the UN ruling, then the Swedish authorities, the Swedish Court of Appeal, then compelled the prosecutor to question Julian in the embassy. It was questioned in November 2016, and in, I think, April 2017, the case was dropped. After he was arrested, the Swedish authorities, a different prosecutor was asked to reinvestigate. She reopened the investigation and closed it again, deciding not to charge, because too much time had passed. And this is the irony. The Swedish authorities took over 6 years to question Julian. Of course, you can just imagine the quality of the evidence This was never a serious investigation. So, but this was the kind of the formal excuse that allowed the extradition mechanisms to be used. Intelligence source back in 2010 told Julian, you know, don't allow yourself to get into custody, because once you're in custody, you know, they're going to find a way to keep you there. And that's what's happened since his arrest on the 11th of April. The US finally showed its hand, and he was he's not charged in the UK. We did also try to get the UK judge to drop the arrest warrant or charge him. They refused as well, until the point when he was expelled from the embassy. Then he was brought to court, convicted the same day of violating the Bail Act for having entered the embassy back in 2012. He served a sentence of 50 weeks in the UK. You serve a prison sentence after spending half the time in the prison. And then since the 22nd of September 2019, he has just been held on remand indefinitely. And when I go to the prison, I speak to some of the other, you know, family members of prisoners, and they talk to each other, and the common question is, well, how long has your husband got left? And I get this question, and I say, well, he's not serving a sentence, and we don't know. It's just an indefinite, you know, it's just it's really a ongoing indefinite punishment. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Stella. So Jennifer Robinson, one of Assange's lawyers, she described multiple times. I saw her saying the same thing a few times. She described the conditions under which she goes through in order to talk to him, and especially before the hearings. In one instance, for example, she arrived, so she was not allowed to meet with him to prepare for the case, as we lawyers do. Stella, you were a lawyer. You know, we do talk to clients before hearings and during the entire process. That's the most normal thing that I can imagine for a criminal attorney. And she was saying that she would arrive there in Belmarsh 2 hours in advance, and they would put her in the waiting room for 1.5 hours, and then she gets 30 minutes to talk to him, which is not enough since she didn't talk before. So I wanted you to talk more about this, and if this is happening to you as well, and to the other. I know that he has a team of lawyers. I wanted to know what is the conditions for the lawyers, and how often the lawyers can talk to him, if any, and how, please describe and elaborate this, because I think it is very important. You know, if I'm arrested for any reason, I want to make sure, as a person in any country, that I have a lawyer and I can talk to my lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, there's been extraordinary difficulties in Belmarsh for Julian to be able to have his legal meetings in full. They're, you know, as Jennifer Robinson described, sometimes they don't, you know, they delay the meetings, and Julian only gets, you know, of a 2-hour slot, 30 minutes. And this isn't just the legal meetings, but also the doctors who have been there to examine him and conduct assessments and so on. It's happened repeatedly. During the COVID outbreak, we tried to get bail, and this was in the lead up to the September hearing, the bulk of the extradition hearing. Bail was denied, and from March to September, when the hearings actually resumed, 4-week hearings, Julian had not seen his lawyers at all during that time. It had been, I think, 6 months where he had not been able to meet with his lawyers inside Belmarsh prison. He had been able to speak to them over the phone and receive legal documents, but with an incredible delay, you know, of 1 or 2 weeks. For example, when the US issued its second superseding indictment, I think it was issued on the 24th of June, I believe, last year. The US authorities didn't actually introduce it into the UK jurisdiction for another 5 weeks or so. But anyway, the DOJ published the indictment on its website along with its highly misleading press release, which is what the journalists read with the DOJ spin. And for the initial, I think, 10 to 14 days, Julian had not been able to read the indictment because that's how long it would take for the post to get through the system to arrive to him. So you had the entire world having access to this indictment, but Julian not having access to it. Obviously, he doesn't have internet in Belmarsh. He has been issued with a computer after a year of requesting it, but it's not really a computer. I mean, it's not functional like a computer. It's basically a PDF reader. They removed all the software for word processing, so he can't type up notes for his lawyers. It's an incredibly inefficient, so inefficient that it's impossible to properly prepare a case under these conditions, especially such a complex case as this. You know, the DOJ has had immense resources. You know, I have no idea how many people have been working on this, but you know, between the different agencies and so on, hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals and man hours into preparing this case, whereas Julian has only had his time in Belmarsh with these incredible obstructions to try to mount a defense. And during the hearing, it was completely absurd. Julian requested to be able to sit with his lawyers, and that was refused. And even the US side didn't oppose it, and yet the judge refused Julian being able to sit next to his lawyers to be able to consult with them. So we had this absurd situation where Julian stood in the back in a glass box behind, you know, behind everyone. We had our backs to him, facing the judge, and him trying to get the attention of his solicitor to bring her attention to various things that were being said. And during this time, you know, we had the gallery. Gabriel was there, waving to his lawyers to try to, you know, get their attention that Julian was trying to speak to them. And then they'd have to go up to the glass and crouch down and listen through through the crack in the glass, and the US side was within earshot, and could hear everything, and and would also know when Julian wanted to draw things to their attention. So completely absurd. So Julian has not been able to mount the defense that she should have been able to mount against this outrageous case, and a case that it's a matter of life and death for Julian, and of huge implications for the rest of us, and these massive obstructions have been very serious, and yeah, I mean the US has a massive advantage, and there is no parity of arms, and it's a bogus case. It's just an outrageous abuse of process, and a show of force that they're able to do this.
We are over time, and it's very late in London and even more in Australia. But I wanted to thank everybody that took their time to appear and to listen to both of you and to ask questions. I wanted to thank both of you for everything that you were doing. And I know that you travel a lot, both of you, and it's not easy, and it takes courage and energy, and I'm sure as a family you must be exhausted, not only physically for what you were going through, but emotionally and psychologically. So I only can wish you strength and persistence, which I know you have already, so continue. I want to thank everybody. This event takes place every month. So visit our website, globalsolutionsmn.org, and you can see the next events that we have. And we will have one still in September. It's a human rights forum about Brazil. We have Amnesty International, Paulo Cruz, and we have Professor David Samuels from the University of Minnesota. He's a political scientist, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful event. And next month in October, we will have another movie discussion. We are going to watch Worth, that's available at Netflix, and it's about the 9/11 payment for the family victims. And we will have Ken Feinberg attending and speaking for us. With that, thank you again, Gabriel and Stella, and I will invite you first, Gabriel, to leave us with your final thoughts and what you wanted to say to us and to everybody that is now live, and for those who are going to be watching this recording in our website and in our YouTube channel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katja, and thank you everyone for coming on and being here. I think my sort of departing message is, take what you've learned here today and talk to other people about it, talk to your neighbours, your friends, your relatives about this case. Just spread awareness. That's the easiest way, I think, for people to be able to do something, just to, you know, take what you've learnt and communicate it to other people.
Thank you. Stella.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. And I think, I mean, Julian's going through a terrible situation, and it's causing a lot of outrage among conscientious, good people, and creating a community that wants to bring this to an end. And you know, I that's what it takes. That's what it takes to change the course of history, of these kinds of miscarriages. And you know, it's incremental over time. And you know, my parents were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. It took years, but we're on the right side of history. And I know Julian will win this, but we all need to help make that happen. So I thank you all for being here and for doing everything you can within your networks, within your communities, within your circles to help Julian regain his freedom, and you know, help all our futures of living in a just, free, and open society.
Yeah. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful night, and good luck to both of you. Thank you so very much for being here. Have a good night, everybody. See you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.